Hello, everybody. I'm Cindy Brockway. I'm the Trustees Director for Cultural Resources, and I want to welcome you to all 118 of our properties that we own across the state of Massachusetts. But today, I really would like to bring you to a very special project that we're working on this year called the Castle Hill Rose Garden. And I'm going to take you on a journey through the creation of the Rose Garden and its beauty, and then we're going to take a look at what it looks like today. And in the next couple of recordings, you're going to get introduced to the craftsmen that are working on the restoration of the columns and the pergolas, and then our horticulturist who's designing this incredible planting plan to go into this garden. So let me take you first back to 1910, 1909, when Robert Teller Crane Jr. bought Castle Hill, this very windswept hilltop, right at the outlet of the Ipswich River into the Atlantic Ocean. And this is literally what it looked like when he bought it. There was a farmhouse down at the bottom of the hill, which they converted and stayed in, but there was nothing at the top of the hill except a road and a series of farm roads that went to the top and came back. And over the space of about 30 years, maybe 25 years, this is what he created there. So a monumental country estate. Eventually he acquired 2,000 acres, of which Castle Hill, his estate property, is about 165. I circled and pointed the arrow to the location of the Rose Garden here, just so you have some idea of where it's located on the property overall. And this here is the main house. This is the casino area, just to orient those of you that are familiar with the property. Now, when this property was created into a country estate, the workers were not afraid to move large volumes of earth for what they were doing. And this is literally how they did it. Hand digging and horse and oxen moving by cartload to create some of these amazing features. So very different than the way that we create gardens today, for sure. I also want to remind everybody that the first house that was built at Castle Hill was an Italian villa. The idea behind this whole estate was that it would be an Italian villa on the North Shore of Boston. And so this was the architecture for the first house. And all of the gardens were created with the same inspiration from the 17th century gardens outside of Rome in Italy. In 1928, the Cranes took this house down and replaced it with the big English country house that you see there today. This is a view of the driveway. They moved the driveway in order to create a formal garden. And here you can see in this little dell here, the beginnings of the moving of that driveway to the left part of your screen and what would eventually become the formal garden or the Italian garden. And this set of stairs here leads down to the Rose Garden that sits over on this side of the road. The man and the genius behind the Rose Garden and its design was this man, Arthur Shurcliff. He changed his name to Shurcliff later in his life. Boston born, he went to MIT. He then trained as one of the first classes that graduated from the Harvard School of Landscape Architecture in 1896. And he worked for the Olmsted firm for a period of about 8 years and then opened his own office in 1904. So when he came to design the Rose Garden in 1910, he'd been in business for himself for a period of time. And he, at 43 years old, was really at the height of his landscape architecture career. But it would continue to grow and become even more well-known as his career progressed. Just so that you know his footprint on Castle Hill, all of these little arrows are pointing to the areas of the property that he designed. So the Grand Allée, which is this incredible piece of landscape architecture that everybody comments on when they come to the property, is his biggest work at Castle Hill. But here's the Rose Garden. Here's a maze that was put in later in the 19-teens. And then this is a beautiful Italian vegetable garden that sits behind this farmhouse that was at the bottom of the hill. So lots of Shurcliff influences here and a real transformation in many of the spaces that the family most loved here at the property. Shurcliff was very well attuned to landscape architecture. He was a highly trained and very good at it by the time he came to the Rose Garden. This is the Edwards Estate, also another place on the North Shore, and you can see here the incredible amount of both landscape architecture but also horticulture that's in this residential design. And here is a picture of one of the gardens in historic Williamsburg. In the late 1920s and 1930s, Shurcliff really became best known for all of the work that he did to design the gardens at historic Williamsburg in Virginia. He partnered in the Rose Garden with this woman. Her name is Harriett Risley Foote. She was born in 1863 and she graduated from Smith with a degree in chemistry and physics. She married a minister and moved to Marblehead in 1891, where she had a 4-acre property that she filled with roses. And the report of her rose garden says that she grew anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 roses in this garden. So really a magnificent rosarian, always testing new varieties, always. In 1948, when she was 85 years old, she published Mrs. Foote's Rose Book. And this has become the manual for our horticulturists to really understand her evaluation of the rose varieties that she had included. We don't know exactly what varieties she put into the gardens at Castle Hill, but we can certainly get her opinion on some of the best roses that she liked for the North Shore of Boston from her book. She was 50 years old when she came to specify all the roses that were going to go in the garden at Castle Hill. The third person I want to introduce you to is Robert Cameron, who's this man on the right of the screen. Robert Cameron had been the head gardener at the Harvard Botanic Garden before he came over to Castle Hill. And he came from Scotland, came to Harvard, was there for a long time. And in 1919, Robert Teller Crane Jr. enticed him to come to Castle Hill. He was 9 years old when he came to Castle Hill, and he retired from here at the age of 74. So he had a long and impactful time at Castle Hill, particularly on the value of horticulture and the palette of plant material that came into not only the rose garden, but all the other gardens here. And here's a picture of him in front of the greenhouses that is now gone at Castle Hill. I also want to pay tribute to the artisans, the carpenters, the stucco workers, the masons that created Shurcliff's design. We've got an incredible collection of wonderful photographs of the garden being constructed. And here you see a number of carpenters laying the poles for the pergola roof in the garden. Here's one of the masons with his wheelbarrow coming in and bringing in either more stucco or more mortar for some of the masonry work. And you can see that all of these walls were done in concrete and then finished with a stucco finish or a rough concrete finish to make them look like they had this Italian finish to them. Here's also a wonderful photograph of the garden being constructed. If anybody ever wanted to see how you form large concrete columns, you can see those over on the right side of this picture. And where the stone is in the middle of this picture is where the water pool and the jet fountain was placed in the garden. Here's a plan for the garden. You can see the water view leads off to the right, and the driveway and the formal garden and the main house are up the path to the left-hand side of this picture. You can see that the garden really has an upper walkway here and stairs that lead down to this sunken lawn full of flower beds. And here's that central pool that I was talking about. And this magnificent view that goes out to the outlet of the Ipswich River into the Atlantic Ocean. And here you go. This is the rose garden all completed. Its stucco columns are done. Its poles are finished on the pergola. And you can see all of Mrs. Foote's rose collection here in the garden. And the beautiful view, if the photograph was a little bit darker, you'd be able to see the water that just goes beyond those trees there in the distance. But really a beautiful spot that sat on this plateau just below the driveway. Here's another view. One of the things that's so great about Castle Hill is its infrastructure and water system. The Crane family was best known for its plumbing manufacturing and its fixtures for outfitting the residential bathrooms of the 20th century. But here you can see, and we've got plans and maps of water storage tanks and reservoirs and piping systems that not only irrigated all of the gardens, but then fed into this pump that pumped this 25-foot water jet in the middle of the rose garden in its heyday. The rose garden was nestled in and filled with plant material all around it. So it almost became a secret hidden garden when you walked down to it from the formal garden. Formal garden, big open spaces, large perennial borders. You cross the driveway, go down these stairs, and then through these masses of rhododendrons, there's a doorway and you don't know what's behind it until you walk through the door. So a real moment of wow when you enter into this rose garden. This is a photograph that I love. Here's Mrs. Crane and her daughter and niece and another woman who we don't know in the rose garden. I would personally love to know what they're looking at, but certainly a wonderful pose. And you can see not only the shrub roses, but the standard roses behind them in the garden that look very similar to that picture of Mrs. Foote in her own rose garden in Marblehead. After World War II, a lot of the capacity for taking care of the gardens had gone to war. The Cranes gave the property to the trustees in 1949, and we did not have the capacity to maintain large numbers of gardeners across the whole property. But we were grateful to acquire such a beautiful estate with such incredible garden rooms and such an incredible amount of wildlife habitat that could be protected. So the Crane Estate and the Crane Reservation, the Crane Wildlife Refuge, has all of the ingredients of the trustees' mission. It has beautiful scenery, it has beautiful cultural history, and it has beautiful natural history to it. So all of them combined to make this really quite wonderful. And the Rose Garden over time became probably one of the property's most iconic ruins, always seen as you turned the curve in the driveway and you looked down upon it. But we didn't let people go into the Rose Garden because it had fallen into this more ruinous state. So a couple of years ago, we decided to experiment and open the door to the Rose Garden and let people come in, and planted some of the beds with some very hardy perennials and roses, just to see what would happen as a little prototype, to see if people would like this compared to all of the work that we'd done to restore the Italian garden and the casino in the Grand Allée. You can see here are the bulb show that we had 2 years ago in the spring. It really is a very iconic and very beautiful place as a ruin. So as we began to think about activating this garden, because the public much, we wanted to be able to keep it in its ruinous state, but stabilize it so we didn't lose it any further and could hold time and then plant the garden beds again and bring people through here as this most romantic spot on the property. But you can see that that was easier said than done. This is one of the bottoms of the columns of the Rose Garden. And you can see here we've planted the plant material right next to it. But stabilizing this so that our acid rain and our changing weather wouldn't deteriorate this any further was the biggest challenge. And so engineers helped us to envision what might happen. Do we put the pergola roof back on? Do we keep it off? What do we do with the fountain basin in the middle of the garden? Does that get restored? Does it stay as a ruin? How we define the ruin was one of our biggest challenges. And so over time, with the support of some wonderful donors and incredibly talented craftsmen and talented project managers on our staff, we've been able to envision stabilizing the ruin and also bringing it back to life. So here you see this combination of project managers with our staff and the construction artisans that were going to help us with the concrete work and the patching, and then the design of the pergola itself, meeting on a very cold day in February this year. And you can see here, we decided that that water jet and the fountain basin was a major piece in the enjoyment of this garden. And so we decided to actually rebuild the fountain basin and put in new piping for the water jet so we can ensure we weren't chasing leaks all the time. And this is some of the work that was going on in order to be able to make that happen last fall. We've spent the winter looking at the types of pergola roofs we wanted to put on here. We can't get the same numbers of large poles, locust poles or cedar poles that they had on the original roof. So we're looking at a new interpretation of the pergola, but that's the beauty of this place, is that it's the combination of the new and the old that we're bringing back to life and rejuvenating it. And then, as I mentioned, our horticulturist there has studied Mrs. Foote's rose book, and she's looked hard at the soil and light conditions in the garden and water conditions in the garden, and has put together a beautiful planting plan that features roses, but also includes perennials and annuals and plant material that can extend the season from early spring all the way into fall. So I hope that you will come and you will visit us and you will enjoy the rose garden and watch it begin to bloom again and see the hard work that we've done to stabilize this ruin, and hope it becomes one of your favorite places at Castle Hill. Thank you all for your time today.